The fluorescent lights in Section 47C flickered again, casting strange shadows across rows of storage containers. Daniel Reed muttered under his breath as he checked another dusty specimen case against his digital inventory list. 3 weeks into his internship at Galactic Research Station Olympus 7, and they had him counting preserved alien plant samples in the oldest, most forgotten corner of the archives. His supervisor had called it character building. Daniel called it punishment for being the newest intern. He marked off another container and moved deeper into the storage wing. The air felt different here, heavier somehow. Most of the station hummed with activity at all hours, but this section had been abandoned years ago when newer facilities opened on the lower decks. Now it served as a dumping ground for outdated equipment and samples nobody cared about anymore. Daniel paused, tilting his head. Was that breathing he heard? The sound came from above, slow and labored, like something large trying very hard to stay quiet. He grabbed his data pad and switched on its flashlight function, pointing it upward. The ceiling stretched 3 stories high, crisscrossed with massive ventilation ducts and support beams. Something moved in the shadows. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. Station regulations required reporting any unusual activity immediately. His finger hovered over the emergency contact button. Then he heard it again, that careful breathing, and beneath it a softer sound that made him freeze. Whimpering. Whatever was up there was scared. Daniel spotted a maintenance ladder bolted to the far wall. Every reasonable part of his brain screamed at him to call security. Instead, he found himself climbing, rung by rung, toward the darkness above. The breathing grew louder as he ascended. When he reached the top platform, he saw the ventilation shaft, its access panel hanging open. He peered inside. 2 enormous eyes stared back at him, reflecting his flashlight like mirrors. Daniel jerked backward, nearly losing his grip on the ladder. The creature flinched deeper into the shaft, scales scraping against metal. In that brief glimpse, Daniel saw copper-colored scales, wings folded tight against a body roughly the size of a horse, and those eyes filled with absolute terror. A Dracori, a baby one, but still a Dracori. The station-wide alarm system erupted into life, red lights flashing. Throughout the section, a mechanical voice echoed through the corridors. Security Alert Level 3. Dangerous specimen has escaped containment. All personnel evacuate to safe zones immediately. Security teams respond to tracking coordinates. Daniel's blood ran cold. They were looking for this creature. This terrified, trembling creature that was trying to make itself as small as possible in a ventilation shaft. The Dracori's scales flickered from copper to dark gray, colors rippling across its body in waves. Daniel had studied enough xenobiology to recognize a fear response when he saw one. The creature wasn't dangerous. It was a child, lost and frightened, and the entire station security force was hunting it like a monster. Heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor below. Security teams were already sweeping the lower levels. They would reach this section within minutes, maybe less. The Dracori started backing away, retreating deeper into the ventilation system. In seconds, it would disappear into the maze of ducts running throughout the station, and who knew what would happen then? The security protocols for escaped Dracori were designed for adult warriors, not scared juveniles. They would use tranquilizers, containment fields, maybe worse. Daniel made a choice that would change everything. "Wait," he said quietly. "Please wait." The creature paused, its massive head turning slightly toward him. Daniel kept his voice soft and steady, the way he used to talk to his little sister during thunderstorms when they were kids. "I know you're scared. I know this place is strange and loud and everyone's looking for you." He slowly sat down on the platform, making himself smaller, less threatening. "But running deeper into those vents won't help. You'll just get more lost." The Dracori remained motionless, watching him with those reflective eyes. Its breathing came fast and shallow, scales still flickering between colors. "My name is Daniel. I work here, sort of. Well, I'm just an intern, so barely work here." He was rambling now, but the creature hadn't fled yet, so he kept talking. I organize old plant samples and get yelled at for putting things in the wrong order. Not very exciting compared to being a dragon, I guess. The security announcements continued below, closer now. Daniel heard voices calling out search patterns, coordinating movements. They were using thermal scanners to track heat. Signatures throughout the station. The Drakkari's breathing quickened, panic building again. Its claws scraped against the metal ductwork as it prepared to bolt. Daniel remembered his sister Sarah, 8 years old and terrified during her first anxiety attack. She had hidden in the closet, convinced something terrible was happening, unable to explain why. Their parents had wanted to pull her out, fix the problem immediately. But Daniel had sat outside the closet door and just talked until her breathing slowed. He knew what words she had needed then. Maybe they would work now. "You're safe," Daniel said clearly, meeting those alien eyes. "You're not in trouble. I won't let them hurt you." The Drakkari stopped moving. Their gazes locked, human and alien, across a gap that should have been impossible to bridge. Daniel saw intelligence in those eyes, understanding, and beneath the fear something else. Hope, maybe, or just desperate enough to trust. Boots thundered on the stairs below. Security was coming. Daniel stood slowly and climbed into the ventilation shaft. The space was cramped for the Drakkari, but enormous for him. He squeezed past the creature's folded wing and moved deeper into the darkness. "Come on," he whispered. "We need to hide." The Drakkari hesitated for just a moment, then followed him into the shadows. Darkness swallowed them whole as Daniel crawled deeper into the ventilation system. Behind them, security teams swept through Section 47C with methodical precision. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness below, voices barking coordinates and clearance codes. The Drakkari moved with surprising quiet for something so large, its scales barely whispering against the metal walls. Daniel led them through 2 junctions before finding a wider section where the ductwork expanded into a maintenance hub. Here they could both fit without touching, though not by much. They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the search parties move through the levels below. Daniel's heart gradually stopped trying to punch through his ribs. The creature beside him breathed more slowly now, though its scales still flickered with nervous energy. "I'm going to call you Copper," Daniel said quietly. "Because of your scales, is that okay?" The Drakkari made a sound somewhere between a huff and a rumble. Daniel chose to interpret it as agreement. He pulled out his data pad, dimming the screen to minimum brightness. The device had station maps, including maintenance layouts. If they were going to hide, he needed to understand where they were and where they could go. Copper shifted, and Daniel caught sight of the universal translator device clipped to a chain around the creature's neck. Of course, the diplomatic corps always equipped their members with translators, which meant this wasn't just any Drakkari juvenile. "Your parent is Ambassador Krelthar, aren't they?" Daniel asked. Copper's head swung toward him, eyes widening. The scales flashed bright orange for a moment, surprise maybe. Daniel tapped his data pad, pulling up the station's public announcements. There it was, buried beneath the security alerts. Ambassador Krelthar of the Drakkari Sovereignty, visiting for trade negotiations. Arrived 3 days ago with family delegation. "You got separated during a tour or something," Daniel guessed. "Got lost, panicked, ended up in the vents." Copper's translator crackled to life with a young, uncertain voice. "Scared, heard them talking about humans, saying humans are dangerous, unstable. When tour guide turned away, I ran." Daniel sat back, processing this. "You were scared of humans, of us." Drakkari learned that emotion means weakness. Humans have too much emotion. Father says humans unpredictable because they feel too much, I thought. Copper's voice trailed off. "When I got lost and human came near, I panicked, ran into the vents." The irony hit Daniel like a physical blow. Copper had been terrified of encountering a human, and now a human was the only thing standing between the juvenile and a traumatic recapture by security forces who would treat it like a dangerous animal. Below them, a security officer's voice crackled through a radio. Thermal signatures inconclusive in ventilation sections. Too much ambient heat from the systems. Recommend deployment of seeker drones. Daniel's stomach dropped. Seeker drones could navigate the ductwork, equipped with multiple sensor types. They would find copper within an hour, maybe less. Listen, Daniel said urgently. They're going to find us if we stay here, but I can help you get back to your parents safely. We have to move through the vents to the diplomatic quarters. It's on the other side of the station, but the duct system connects. Copper's scales darkened to almost black. Cannot. If they catch me running, they will. Think I am dangerous. Father will be shamed. Delegation will fail. Better to hide. Hiding isn't working, Daniel pointed out. And it's only going to get worse. Those drones they're sending, they'll corner you, tranquilize you, drag you out unconscious. How will that look to the delegation? The juvenile made a low, distressed sound. Its wings trembled against its sides. Daniel thought about his own childhood fears. Getting lost in the Natural History Museum when he was 7, wandering the dinosaur exhibit for what felt like hours. He had hidden behind a massive T-Rex skeleton, too scared to ask for help, convinced he would be in terrible trouble. His mother had found him there, crying and terrified. She hadn't been angry at all. When I was a kid, I got lost once, Daniel said. In a big building full of strange exhibits and too many people. I hid because I thought I'd be punished for wandering off. But the longer I hid, the more scared I got. My mom finally found me, and you know what she said. Copper's eyes fixed on him. She said that being lost wasn't my fault, but staying lost when I could ask for help, that was a choice I made. And sometimes the scariest thing is also the only way home. The juvenile was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly its scales shifted from black to a muted copper gray. You would help me, even though your people search for me, even though helping me could bring you trouble. Yeah, Daniel said simply, I would. Why? Daniel had to think about that. Why was he doing this? He barely knew anything about Drakari culture. This creature could probably bite him in half without much effort. Helping could cost him his internship, maybe worse. But looking into those frightened eyes, he knew there was only one answer. Because you're scared and alone and I can help. That's enough reason for me. Copper made a sound that the translator didn't process, something too complex for the device to interpret. But when the creature moved closer, letting its wing brush against Daniel's shoulder, he understood anyway. We should move soon, Daniel said, pulling up the duct system map. Before those drones launch. The diplomatic quarters are in Section 12A near the main conference halls. That's 43 ventilation sections from here. That is far, Copper observed. Yeah, we'll need to be careful, quiet, and lucky. Daniel managed a small smile. But hey, I once navigated my way out of a museum full of dinosaur bones. How much harder can this be? Copper's scales flickered with what might have been amusement. You are strange for a human. I expected humans to be loud, aggressive. You are neither. Give me time, Daniel said. I might surprise you yet ready. Together, they began the long journey through the hidden pathways of the station. 20 minutes into their journey, Daniel discovered that navigating station ventilation systems was significantly harder than escaping a museum. The ducts twisted in illogical patterns, branching off in directions his map didn't always account for. Several times they had to backtrack when a passage proved too narrow for Copper to squeeze through. They moved in careful silence, pausing frequently to listen for security teams. The search had intensified. Daniel heard officers on every level now, their voices filtering up through vent grates as they methodically checked each section. Junction ahead, Daniel whispered, consulting his map. The ductwork opened into a larger space where 6 different passages converged. We need to take the 3rd branch on the right. That should lead us toward the central hub. Copper followed him into the junction, a circular chamber large enough for both of them to turn around in. Dim light filtered through grates below, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. Daniel was about to continue when Copper's claw caught his shoulder, holding him back. The juvenile tilted its head, listening to something Daniel couldn't hear. Then voices drifted up from below, growing louder. A security patrol was approaching the corridor directly beneath them. Daniel and Copper pressed against the curved wall, making themselves as still as possible. Through the grate, Daniel could see two security officers stop almost directly below their position. One was a Tordanian, tall and covered in chitinous armor plates. The other was Centauri, her crystalline skin reflecting the corridor lights. "Thermal imaging is useless in these sections," the Tordanian officer grumbled. "The heating systems throw off too much interference." "Director approved the Seeker drones," the Centauri officer replied. "They're being prepped now, should be deployed within the hour." 1 hour might be too long. If that creature gets into the residential sections, we'll have a panic. The Tordanian tapped something on his data pad. "Recommend we seal off the ventilation access points. Trap it in the system until the drones can locate it." Daniel's eyes widened. If they sealed the vents, there would be no way to reach the diplomatic quarters. They would be trapped, and when the drones found them, Copper would be treated like the dangerous animal everyone assumed it was. The officers moved on, their voices fading down the corridor. Daniel checked his map again, mind racing through possibilities. They needed to move faster, but the route to Section 12A required passing through at least 3 major corridors. Any one of them could have security checkpoints. "There's another way," Copper said quietly. "Through the old storage sections, the ones they abandoned when new facilities were built." "How do you know about those?" "The tour guide mentioned them. Said they were off-limits because the environmental controls were unreliable, but the ducts would still be connected." Daniel pulled up the maintenance overlay on his map. Copper was right. The abandoned sections had their own ventilation network that eventually connected to the main system near the diplomatic quarters. It would add time to their journey, but the area would be empty, no security patrols to avoid. "Good thinking," Daniel said. "Which way?" Copper pointed with one claw toward a smaller duct branch Daniel had dismissed as a service line. "That way. I remember the guide saying the old sections were in the upper decks, near where the original command center used to be." They crawled through the narrow passage, which grew tighter as they progressed. Daniel had to turn sideways in places, his shoulders scraping against the metal walls. Behind him, Copper struggled more, folding wings at angles that looked painful. The duct finally opened into a forgotten corner of the station that felt like stepping back in time. The architecture was older here, built in the rough utilitarian style of early space stations before aesthetics became a priority. Emergency lighting strips glowed faintly along the corridors, casting everything in an eerie blue-green. Daniel dropped down from a vent opening into an empty corridor. Copper followed, landing with surprising grace despite its size. They stood together in the abandoned section, listening to the absolute silence. No humming life support, no distant voices, no security alerts, just the quiet tick of cooling metal. "It's strained." Here, Copper observed, scales shifting to a curious amber color, like a place that has forgotten it exists. They moved through the old storage sections carefully, passing rooms filled with outdated equipment and cargo containers marked with shipping codes from decades past. Daniel noticed signs in human languages mixed with older galactic trade scripts. This had been one of the first sections built when humans joined the galactic community, back when everything was new and uncertain. In one room, Daniel found a wall covered in photographs. Human crew members from years ago, smiling at the camera, working alongside aliens of species he recognized, and some he didn't. Young people, most of them probably not much older than he was now. The first generation of humans to work among the stars. "They look happy," Copper said, studying the images. "Not unstable or dangerous." "We're not," Daniel replied quietly. "The dangerous part anyway. Humans feel things strongly, but that doesn't make us unstable. It makes us human." They continued through the abandoned sections, following duct connections toward the active parts of the station. The journey took longer than Daniel had hoped, but they encountered no security patrols, no checkpoints, nothing but dust and memories. Eventually, they reached a junction where the old ventilation system connected to the new. Daniel checked his map. Section 12, A was close now, just a few passages away. But between them and their destination lay the main corridor, one of the busiest areas of the station. "We'll have to cross that corridor," Daniel said, pointing at his map. "There's no way around it. The vents connect on the other side, but there's about 10 meters of open space we'll have to cover." Copper's scales darkened with worry. "Security will see us." "Not if we're fast and lucky." Daniel pulled up the station schedule on his data pad. "There's a shift change in 15 minutes. The corridor will be crowded but distracted. We might be able to slip across in the confusion." "Might." "Yeah, might." Daniel looked at his new friend. "But I don't see another option, unless you want to wait here and hope the drones don't find us first." Copper rumbled deep in its chest, a sound that might have been a laugh. "You humans and your terrible plans, let us try." They moved into position near the vent opening that overlooked the main corridor, waiting for the right moment to cross into the unknown. The shift change brought exactly the chaos Daniel had hoped for. Station personnel flooded the main corridor, heading to and from their assignments in a river of different species and uniforms. Daniel watched through the vent, great as hundreds of workers passed below, talking, laughing, complaining about their duties in a dozen different languages. "Now," Daniel whispered, "while they're distracted." He dropped down from the vent opening, landing in a maintenance alcove barely visible from the main corridor. Copper followed a moment later, tucking wings tight to squeeze through the opening. For a few precious seconds, they were invisible in the alcove, just another shadow among many. Daniel peered around the corner. The corridor stretched 30 meters across, lined with shops and service stations. The vent opening they needed was on the opposite side, hidden behind a decorative panel near a closed cafe. They just had to cross without anyone noticing a human and a juvenile Dracari moving together. "Stay close to the wall," Daniel instructed. "Move casual like we belong here." They stepped into the corridor, and immediately everything went wrong. A security officer rounded the corner ahead of them, a massive Tordanian with military bearing and sharp eyes. His name badge read Gravik, and his hand moved immediately to the weapon at his belt when he spotted them. "Stop right there." Gravik's voice cut through the crowd noise like a blade. The busy corridor fell silent. Hundreds of beings turned to stare. Daniel felt his blood turn to ice as more security officers appeared, surrounding them from multiple directions. Copper moved instinctively, positioning itself between Daniel and the armed officers. "Step away from the creature, human," Gravik ordered, his weapon now drawn but not yet aimed. "Slowly." "His name is Copper," Daniel said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "And he's not a creature, he's a child." "That child is a Dracari juvenile separated from its guardian. Station protocols require immediate containment." Gravik's eyes narrowed. "You are interfering with a security operation. Step away now." More officers arrived, forming a loose circle around them. Daniel counted at least 8, all armed, all watching Copper with the wariness reserved for apex predators. The crowd of station personnel backed away, some pulling out communication devices to record. The confrontation. Copper's scales blazed red, the color of extreme fear in Dracari biology. The juvenile's claws scraped against the floor, its breathing quick and shallow. Daniel recognized the signs. Copper was on the edge of panic, and a panicked Dracari could be truly dangerous. "Everyone needs to calm down," Daniel said, addressing both the security team and Copper. "Nobody wants anyone to get hurt here." "Then step aside," Gravik repeated. "This doesn't concern you." "It does concern me. Copper is my friend." That statement created a ripple of shock through the watching crowd. A human claiming friendship with a Dracari. The two species barely spoke to each other outside of formal diplomatic channels. Humans were too emotional for Dracari comfort, and Dracari were too cold for human understanding, or so everyone believed. A junior security officer, a Centauri female named Priya, spoke up hesitantly. Sir, the juvenile has had multiple opportunities to harm the human. It hasn't. Maybe. We follow protocols, Officer Priya. Gravik cut her off. Activate containment field generators. Prepare tranquilizer rounds. The security team moved with practiced efficiency. 4 officers produced cylindrical devices, setting them on the floor in a square pattern around Daniel and Copper. Containment field generators, designed to create an energy barrier that would trap Copper in place. The tranquilizer rounds would come next, enough sedative to drop an adult Dracari, never mind a juvenile. Daniel's mind raced. In seconds, Copper would be trapped, tranquilized, and dragged away like a dangerous animal. The juvenile's scales were cycling through colors rapidly now, red to black to bright orange, the physiological signs of a Dracari about to enter fight-or-flight mode. If Copper fought, people would get hurt. If Copper fled, the situation would get worse. There was only one choice left. Daniel stepped directly in front of Copper, placing himself between his friend and the armed security officers. "If you want to hurt Copper, you'll have to go through me," Daniel said quietly. Complete silence fell over the corridor. Hundreds of witnesses stood frozen, communication devices recording every moment. The security team stared at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. Gravik's expression shifted from professional detachment to genuine confusion. "Move aside. We are not going to harm you, but we cannot allow." "Can't you see what you're doing?" Daniel interrupted. "Copper got lost and scared, that's all. A child got separated from their parent in a strange place and panicked. You're treating them like a monster when all they need is to go home." "Dracari juveniles are classified as potentially dangerous," Gravik said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Protocols exist for a reason." "Your protocols are about to traumatize an ambassador's child," Daniel shot back. "How do you think Ambassador Krelthar will react when you tell them you tranquilized their juvenile because it got lost? Is that really the diplomatic incident you want to create?" He saw doubt flicker across Gravik's face. The Tordanian officer glanced at his team, at the watching crowd, at the dozens of recording devices capturing everything. Priya spoke up again, more confident this time. "He has a point, sir. The juvenile hasn't acted aggressively. The human has been with it for at least an hour and he's unharmed. Maybe we should try contacting Ambassador Krelthar before we escalate." Other security officers murmured agreement. The containment field generators sat inactive on the floor, waiting for activation commands that hadn't come yet. Gravik studied Daniel with intense scrutiny. "You are willing to risk yourself for this creature?" "For my friend," Daniel corrected. "Yes." Behind him, Copper made a soft sound. Daniel felt the juvenile's wings settle gently against his back, protective and grateful in equal measure. Gravik lowered his weapon slightly. 5 minutes. We will attempt to contact the ambassador, but if the juvenile shows any sign of aggression, any sign at all, we activate containment immediately." "Understood." "Understood," Daniel agreed. He sat down on the corridor floor, right there in front of everyone. Copper settled beside him, scales slowly fading from red to amber. They waited together while Priya worked her communication device, trying to reach the diplomatic quarters. The 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. Priya's communication device crackled to life with a voice that made everyone in the corridor freeze. It was deep, resonant, carrying authority that transcended species barriers. "This is Ambassador Krelthar, who has been speaking with my child." The Centauri officer looked at Daniel, gesturing for him to take the device. He accepted it with trembling hands, very aware that hundreds of beings were watching his every move. "Ambassador, my name is Daniel Reed. I'm an intern in the Xenobiology archives. I found copper in the ventilation system about 90 minutes ago." Silence stretched across the communication channel. Then Krelthar spoke again, and Daniel detected something unexpected in the ambassador's voice. Relief. "You found copper when our own security could not. You have done what trained professionals failed to accomplish. Tell me, Daniel Reed, is my child unharmed? Daniel glanced at Copper, who sat pressed against his side. A small scrape on one wing, nothing serious, mostly just scared. Scared, Krelthar repeated, seeming to taste the word. Yes, Copper would be frightened in this situation. And you, human, you kept my child safe despite the fear you must have felt. I wasn't afraid of Copper, Daniel said truthfully. I was afraid for Copper. There's a difference. Another pause, longer this time. When Krelthar spoke again, his voice carried an emotion Daniel couldn't quite identify. Indeed there is. I would like you to escort my child to the diplomatic quarters personally. Is this acceptable to station security? Gravik looked like he had swallowed something extremely sour, but he nodded stiffly. Acceptable, Ambassador. We will provide a security escort to ensure safe passage. That will not be necessary, Krelthar replied. My child is clearly comfortable with Daniel Reed. I trust that will be sufficient. The crowd parted as Daniel and Copper began walking toward Section 12. The security team followed at a respectful distance, weapons holstered but alert. Station personnel whispered among themselves, communication devices still recording, capturing the strange sight of a human and a Dracari juvenile moving side by side through the station. I'm sorry, Copper said quietly, voice transmitted through the translator. I made everything complicated. Father will be ashamed of my weakness. You weren't weak, Daniel countered. You were lost and scared. That happens to everyone regardless of species. Not to Dracari. We are taught that emotion is weakness, that fear must be conquered through logic and strength. Copper's scales flickered uncertainly. But you showed me something different. You were afraid for me, you said. That fear made you brave, not weak. Daniel thought about that as they walked. Maybe that's the difference. Humans don't try to conquer our emotions. We try to understand them, use them, let them guide us to do the right thing. Being afraid for someone you care about isn't weakness. It's what makes caring matter. They reached the diplomatic quarters, an entire section of the station reserved for visiting dignitaries. The corridors here were wider, decorated with artwork from 100 different worlds. Guards stood at attention, but they stepped aside when they saw Copper approaching. Ambassador Krelthar waited at the entrance to the Dracari delegation's suite. The ambassador was massive, easily 3 times Copper's size, scales gleaming with formal patterns that Daniel didn't know how to read. Eyes like molten gold fixed on Daniel with an intensity that made him feel very small and very human. Ambassador, Daniel managed, trying to remember proper diplomatic protocols and failing completely. Krelthar ignored him for the moment, focusing entirely on Copper. The juvenile approached slowly, scales dim with shame. But the ambassador simply lowered one massive head and touched it gently to Copper's forehead, a gesture of obvious affection. I was worried, Krelthar said simply. I am sorry, Father. I heard the other delegates talking about humans being dangerous and unstable. When the guide turned away, I panicked and ran. I brought shame to our delegation. You brought no shame, the ambassador corrected. You showed me something I had failed to see, that our assumptions about humanity may be flawed. Krelthar turned to Daniel, and the young intern fought the urge to step backward. Being scrutinized by an adult Dracari was like being examined by a force of nature. You are very young, the ambassador observed. An intern, you said, yet you accomplished what our security could not. You found my child, earned trust, and kept Copper safe through a situation that would have overwhelmed many experienced beings. How? Daniel shrugged helplessly. I just talked to Copper, listened, tried to understand what was needed instead of assuming I knew. Emotional intelligence, Krelthar said thoughtfully. A uniquely human strength, or so I am beginning to believe. Tell me, Daniel Reed, what do you want as reward for your actions? Reward, Daniel blinked. I wasn't doing it for a reward. Copper needed help. That's reason enough. The ambassador's scales shifted through a complex pattern that might have been surprise or approval or something Daniel had no framework to understand. You are very young, Krelthar repeated, And very human, I mean both as compliments. The ambassador gestured toward the delegation suite. I have a proposal for you. Our diplomatic mission will be traveling to 12 worlds over the next 6 months, meeting with various governments and cultural groups. We need someone who can help bridge the gap between Dracari logic and the emotional perspectives of other species. Someone who sees past fear to understanding. Would you consider joining us as a cultural liaison? Daniel stared. I'm just an intern, I catalog plant samples. You are someone who saw a frightened child instead of a dangerous creature, Krelthar countered. Someone who chose compassion over protocol. These qualities are more valuable than any formal training. Before Daniel could respond, the station director appeared, flanked by administrative staff. Director Nora Chen looked stressed, which made sense given that a major diplomatic incident had nearly occurred on her watch. Ambassador, I want to apologize for the security response, Chen began. We had protocols in place for escaped dangerous specimens, but clearly the situation was misunderstood. The situation revealed important truths, Krelthar replied. About assumptions, about fear, and about the value of emotional understanding. I hold no ill will toward your security forces. They acted according to their training. Chen's gaze shifted to Daniel, and her expression was difficult to read. Read, you bypassed security protocols and assisted in concealing a missing diplomat's child. Technically, that's grounds for disciplinary action. Daniel's stomach sank. Of course. He had broken rules, ignored procedures, acted on instinct instead of following protocol. His internship was over before it had really begun. Then Chen smiled. It's also grounds for commendation. You prevented a diplomatic crisis through quick thinking and genuine compassion. If you want to accept Ambassador Krelthar's offer, you have my full support. Copper moved closer to Daniel, scales bright with hopeful amber. The juvenile spoke in Dracari and the translator converted it to universal. Please come with us. I still have much to learn about being brave. Daniel looked at the ambassador, at Copper, at the opportunity being offered. 2 weeks ago he had been cataloging plant samples and wondering if he would ever do anything meaningful. Now he stood at a crossroads that could change everything. I accept, Daniel said. When do we leave? 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Daniel packed his few belongings, filed paperwork transferring him from intern status to cultural liaison, and endured a crash course in Dracari customs from the ambassador's staff. Most of the diplomatic team remained skeptical of adding a human to their delegation, but Copper's enthusiastic support gradually wore down their resistance. On his last evening at the station, Daniel stood in the observation deck, watching ships come and go through the docking ports. The Dracari diplomatic vessel was already in position, a sleek craft that looked more like a work of art than a spacecraft. Tomorrow they would board and begin the journey to their first destination. Footsteps approached from behind. Daniel turned to find Priya, the Centauri security officer who had spoken up during the confrontation. She carried a small case in her crystalline hands. I wanted to give you this before you left, she said, opening the case to reveal her Security Academy graduation pin. The small badge gleamed in the starlight filtering through the observation windows. It's tradition to give this to someone who teaches you something important about what it means to protect people. Daniel stared at the pin. I didn't teach you anything. You were already brave enough to speak up against your commanding officer. You taught me that sometimes protection means understanding fear instead of responding to it with force. Priya pressed the pin into his hand. Gravik learned that lesson too, though he's too stubborn to admit it directly. He asked me to tell you that if you ever need security assistance anywhere in the galaxy, contact him. He'll come. After Priya left, Daniel remained on the observation deck, turning the small pin over in his fingers. A Tordanian security chief offering help to a human intern. 2 weeks ago, that would have seemed impossible. More visitors came as the evening progressed. Fellow interns wished him luck, some envious, others genuinely happy for his opportunity. The station director stopped by to formally transfer his employment status and remind him that he would always have a position waiting if the diplomatic mission didn't work out. "You did something remarkable," Chen said. "You saw past species barriers and protocol to recognize a person in need. Don't lose that quality, no matter where this journey takes you." Night cycle came, and with it the quiet that settled over the station when most beings slept. Daniel returned to his quarters one last time, looking at the small room that had been his home for 3 weeks. Not much to show for his time here, except for a friendship that had changed everything. A soft knock at the door announced Copper's arrival. The juvenile had to crouch to fit in the human-sized corridor, but managed it with growing grace. "Cannot sleep," Copper admitted. "Too much thinking about tomorrow." "Yeah, me too," Daniel said. "Nervous." Excited, scared, both at once. Copper's scales flickered through colors that matched the emotional complexity. "Is this normal for humans, feeling multiple things simultaneously?" "Completely normal. We call it being human," Daniel smiled. "Though I guess you're experiencing it too, so maybe it's not just a human thing after all." They sat together in the small quarters, Daniel on his bunk and Copper curled on the floor, and talked about what tomorrow would bring. The first destination was Torden Prime, homeworld of the Tordanian people, a military culture that valued strength and discipline above emotional expression. It would be a challenging start to their diplomatic tour. "Father says the Tordanians will be skeptical of human involvement in our delegation," Copper said. "They view emotion as weakness, even more strictly than Drakari do." "Then we'll show them what we showed everyone here," Daniel replied. "That emotion and strength aren't opposites. That caring about something makes you fight harder for it, not less." Morning came too quickly. Daniel boarded the Drakari vessel carrying one small bag of belongings and wearing Priya's security pin on his jacket. The ship's interior was designed for beings much larger than humans, making him feel like a child in an adult world. But Copper stayed close, serving as both guide and friend. Ambassador Krelthar gathered the delegation in the main conference chamber for a final briefing before departure. Daniel counted 15 Drakari in total, most adults who had spent decades in diplomatic service. He was easily the youngest being in the room, and definitely the only human. "We embark on a mission of understanding," the ambassador began, "to demonstrate that Drakari culture values cooperation and mutual respect across species barriers. Some of you questioned my decision to include a human in our delegation. I want to address that concern directly." Krelthar's golden eyes found Daniel in the crowd. "Daniel Reed represents something our people have struggled to understand. The integration of emotion with action, the use of empathy as a tool for connection rather than a weakness to overcome. In the coming months, we will visit worlds that view Drakari as cold, calculating, even threatening. Daniel will help us show them otherwise." The delegation murmured, though Daniel couldn't tell if the response was positive or skeptical, probably a mix of both. The ship departed from Olympus 7 smoothly, artificial gravity, keeping everyone stable as they accelerated toward the first jump point. Daniel watched through a viewport as the station shrank to a point of light among thousands of others. Somewhere in that vast structure, people were going about their daily routines, cataloging samples, monitoring systems, living ordinary lives. 3 weeks ago, that had been his life too. Copper joined him at the viewport, scales reflecting the starlight. "Regrets?" "No," Daniel said honestly. "This is exactly where I need to be." The ship reached the jump point, and space twisted around them in ways that human eyes weren't meant to perceive. When reality stabilized again, they were in a different system entirely, approaching a blue-green world that hung in space like a jewel. Torden Prime, their first test. Ambassador Krelthar's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All delegation members to your stations. We will be in orbit within the hour. Daniel Reed, please report to the conference chamber for final briefing." Daniel took one last look at the approaching planet, then headed deeper into the ship. Copper walked beside him, and somehow that made everything feel possible. Ready to show them what humans and Drakari can do together? Daniel asked. Copper's scales flashed bright gold, the color of confidence and determination. Ready. They entered the conference chamber side by side, human and Drakari, emotional and logical, different but united. Whatever challenges waited below on Torden Prime, they would face them together. And maybe, just maybe, they would prove that the galaxy's assumptions about both their species were worth questioning. The mission was just beginning, but Daniel already knew one truth with absolute certainty. He had climbed into a ventilation shaft to help a frightened child, and in doing so had found his purpose among the stars. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes, and sometimes the words someone needs most are the simplest ones of all. You're not alone,